In this video, we're going to take a look at an introduction to arrays. So let's begin with data structures. Well, C# provides us with a built-in solution to easily keep track of lots of different pieces of information, right? And data structures are basically formats designed to store larger amounts of information in an organized fashion. So an array is one very basic data structure. Programmers use arrays as containers to store multiple pieces of information that somehow relate to each other in some way. So like a list of presidents of the United States, or types of cheeses in alphabetical order, or the finishing positions of runners in a race. So these are all examples of what could be in an array. Arrays keep things in order. They keep our data in specific linear sequence. So since our values are kept in order, it allows us to easily find the information we're looking for. Otherwise, we're going to have a huge jumbled mess of data, right? So rather than having to create multiple variables and retrieve information using a variable name, we can use one single array and retrieve it using its location in that array. So strings are actually arrays of characters, if you haven't realized that yet. Just like we can use syntax to access parts of a string, we can also do so with arrays. So our learning objectives for this class is to learn how to build arrays in C#, how to find the length of an array, and how to access array values, and how to edit arrays, and how to read documentation and use built-in methods. So building arrays. Arrays are a collection of values that all share the same type of data, right? So you could have an array of type string that contains a list of your favorite songs, or you can have an array of type integer that stores a collection of user IDs. So when we define a variable to hold an array, we also have to specify the type. For example, this is integer. This array is going to contain integers. This one's going to contain string, and this one's going to contain decimal numbers. So to declare a variable that holds an array, we first write the type of data. Okay, so the data type that will be stored in the array, then add the square brackets to signify that it is holding an array instead of a single value, then followed by the name of the array. Next, we specify values. We can define and initialize an array at the same time by specifying the values that we want to store in it. So for example, integer, which is the data type, and then the square brackets to show that this is an array, and then the variable name equals to denote that we're storing a value to the array, and then write out the numbers we're putting in the array, separated by commas, and then enclosed in the curly brackets. Okay, and that is the syntax. You may also see arrays defined and initialized using a new keyword. Okay, so the new keyword signifies that we're instantiating a new array from the array class. What are classes, you might ask? Okay, don't worry, we'll cover classes in another lesson. For now, just think of it as another way to create an array. So when we want to know how many items an array contains, we can do this with the .length property. Okay, so we have here this array called plant heights, which is containing integers. So the array length is going to be 3. And to find the length, okay, here I have a variable called array length, which is of type integer. And then array length, the value would be plant heights arrays length, property length. Okay? So when you're accessing array items, arrays are useful for storing values, right? They're not very useful though if those values just simply stay in there. So they're only useful because we can access them, right? So arrays order items so they're in a specific sequence, which makes it helpful for accessing each item, right? So each value has a specific position in the array known as its index, okay, like its position. So think of an index like an address. It's what we use to locate an item in the array. So remember that in C#, arrays start their index at 0, not at 1. Okay, so then after 0, add 1 for each value. So accessing a value from a list. Okay, so here we have an array, which is of string data type, and the array's name is cities. Okay, and these are the values inside the curly brackets. So at index 1, you have New York. Sorry, index 0, you have New York. At index 1, you have Beijing. And index 2, you have Nairobi. All right. So how you would access it is, first you have the array name, which is cities, right? And then you have the square brackets, okay? And then you have the index number, okay? So whatever the index number is, if it's 0 here, and that would grab New York. Okay, so saving it to a variable. Okay, so first you access a value from the list, write out the name of the array, right? Followed by the brackets, and then inside the brackets, the index number that you want. And then you can save that to a variable. Okay, so for example, here you have an array of plant heights, right? And these are the different items in there. Okay, and then here you have plant 2 heights. So the second plant, what's the height of the second plant? Okay, equals plant heights. Oh, that should have an S in there. So plant heights. Okay, and the index is 1, which is the second position there. So which means the answer would be 4. And that will be saved into this variable, plant 2 height. So editing arrays. Once we create an array, the size of that array is actually fixed. However, it's possible to change the values that it contains. Okay, remember the size of the array is now fixed once you create it, but you can still change the values that it contains inside of it. So you can initialize first, always, and then add the values later as well. Okay, you can initialize an array that has a length of 3 without specifying what those values are, and then later go back and edit the array to include the new value. So this is useful if you know how many things you're going to be expecting, but you don't actually know what their specific values are yet. So default values are going to be 0 or null. Okay, so here, if you go like this, without giving the specific values, you can say, you know, here's an array made up of integers type, and this is the array name, plant heights, and you're going to have a new array of integer type array, and there will be 3 values in there. Okay, so later you can set the value. So plant height 2, the one at the 3rd position, will be 8, so it'll be 0, 0, 8. So when we create an array with a known length but no known values, the array stores a default type of 0 for integer and null for 0, null for string, right? Okay, so 0, 0 because nothing has been set, but 8 because now you have set this. Okay. So editing values of pre-existing arrays. So we can also edit the values of pre-existing arrays. We can't add to the length of an existing array. We can only swap out values. Okay, so for example, if you already have this 3, 4, and 6, you can still change the one at index 1 to 5. So now instead of 3, 4, and 6, 4 becomes 5. You can change the values, but you can't change the length. You can't add another value, a new value in there at the end, right? Okay, so we have built-in methods. In C#, there are several built-in methods that we can use with arrays, like sort or IndexOf. Okay, the built-in method Array.sort or sort is a quick way to organize array data into a logical sequence. Okay, so for example, if you have this plant heights, you have 3, 6, 4, and 1. And if you go array.sort plant heights, okay, if it's integer values, which it is, it will sort into ascending values from the lowest to the highest. Okay, so now it was sorted from 1, 3, 4, and 6. If it's a string values, then it was sorted alphabetically, starting from A, B, C, and D, and so on. The next is IndexOf. So Array.IndexOf takes a value and then returns its index. So to find out where a specific value is located in an array, okay? So for example, if you want to find out where 6 is in that array, or if it even exists, right? So you can go Array.IndexOf and then the array name and then the value that you're looking for. So IndexOf takes 2 parameters, and you know what parameters are, right? From our previous class. So the first parameter is the array, which is this. And then the second one is the value whose index we're locating, which is the 6 here. So if the values appears more than once in an array, of course, it returns only the first occurrence within the specified range. If it can't find the array, then, if it can't find the value in the array, then it returns the lower bound of the array, -1. Okay, so most oftentimes arrays start at 0, right? So always be -1. That if you see a -1, that means that it doesn't exist in there. We also have array find, which searches for a specific value or a set of values that match a certain condition. And of course, it'll return the first occurrence in the array. Okay, so here, if you want to find the first occurrence of a plant height that is greater than 5 inches, so it's more than 5 inches, the first height that's more than 5 inches, you have the array name, the parameter was the array, and then the kind of like the condition here, which is height equals, and then the angle bracket here, then height more than 5, okay? And note here that a lambda function is used, and we'll talk more about that in a next lesson as well, okay? So what it's going to find then, it's this, of course, 6, right? Because that's the first one that's greater than 5. So find, array.find takes 2 parameters, so the array and the predicate that defines what we're looking for. So a predicate's a method that takes one input and outputs a boolean. Okay, so it's customary to use a lambda function for the predicate to determine if the value meets the necessary criteria. And don't worry, we'll study this more in future lessons, okay? How that is written. Unlike IndexOf and find, unlike IndexOf, it's a bit similar to IndexOf, right? But it's not the same thing. So unlike IndexOf, find returns the actual values that match the condition instead of their index. Okay, so it's not going to tell you the index. It's not going to tell you, so the answer is obviously 6, right? So, which is the second value. So it's not going to give you 1 as the index position, but it's going to tell you 6. Okay, the value of it rather than the position or the index. So that's it for this PowerPoint. Please do the activities and then continue on and watch the next PowerPoint in this class.